A widowed Mafia boss discovered his new nanny breastfeeding his baby daughter. And what he did next would shatter everything she thought she knew about power, mercy, and survival in his dangerous world. Inside the fortified compound where concrete walls met bulletproof glass, the cry of a 2-month-old baby girl pierced through the heavy silence like a knife cutting through armor. For hours, no one dared enter. The regular nanny had vanished without explanation, too frightened, perhaps, or paid off by enemies. The Mafia boss was locked behind steel doors in his war room, surrounded by monitors and encrypted phones, coordinating operations that decided whether men lived or died. And baby Haley's voice was fading into something weaker, something that made the armed guards stationed outside shift uncomfortably, but say nothing. Before we go on, if you love stories of unexpected kindness, power, and danger, subscribe now. Hit like drop where you are watching from. I'm right here reading every single one, and it's helped this story travel far. Downstairs in the marble hallway that gleamed like ice, a young woman named Isabel Rowan moved through her cleaning duties with mechanical precision, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped surfaces that were already spotless. Her light brown skin seemed to glow softly under the cold mansion lighting, her soft brown hair pulled back in a simple style that matched her quiet demeanor. Each sound from the nursery upstairs made her chest tighten until she could barely draw breath. It had been 8 weeks since she lost her own infant daughter. 8 weeks since she last felt that tiny weight in her arms, that perfect trust against her chest. Since that night in the hospital when the monitors went silent, every time a baby cried, something inside her fractured a little more. She pressed her cleaning cloth against the wall and whispered into the empty hallway, "Please stop crying, little angel." But her voice was swallowed by another desperate wail from the nursery, a sound of hunger, of fear, of a child searching for comfort that would not come. Isabel closed her eyes, her hands pressed flat against the marble. The walls of this fortress felt like they were closing in around her. The armed men at every corner, the security cameras tracking movement, the leather furniture and imported artwork, none of the wealth and power could hide the agony echoing through these walls. Upstairs, baby Haley lay in her designer crib, her small face red and damp with tears. Her lips were cracked and dry, her tiny mouth searching weakly for milk that was nowhere to be found. The bottle beside her had been sitting there for hours, the formula separated and spoiled, filling the nursery with a sour smell. The regular nanny, Maria Santos, had left that morning saying she needed to pick up special formula from the pharmacy, but she never returned. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. Someone had gotten to her, threatened her family, paid her to disappear. In the Mafia world, even the innocent became pawns. In the war room 3 floors below, Damon Haverford sat before a wall of security monitors and encrypted communication devices. His strong jawline was set in grim determination, his broad shoulders tense beneath his perfectly tailored, dark suit. The grief he carried was hidden behind hard expressions and colder decisions. Grief for the wife he lost during childbirth. Grief for the normal life his daughter would never have. He had not truly slept since Clara died. Every night he worked until dawn, making deals and eliminating threats, using violence and strategy to build walls around the one thing he had left to protect. The crying from the nursery reached him even through the reinforced doors, transmitted through the security system's audio feed. His hand paused over the keyboard as he listened. For a moment, he thought of going to her, of being the father she needed. But the video conference with his Chicago contacts was still active, faces on the screen waiting for his response, discussing territory disputes that could turn bloody if handled wrong. "Haverford, are we in agreement?" a voice asked, through the speakers. Damon blinked, forcing his attention back to the screen, back to the game of power and survival. Yes, proceed as planned. But the crying did not stop. It only grew weaker. Downstairs, Isabel dropped her cleaning supplies. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her legs moved before her mind could form coherent thought. She ran toward the service stairs, one hand on the railing, her lips moving in silent prayer. Please, God, let the baby be safe. Please, don't let me be too late. Her breath came in short gasps as she reached the third floor, her hands shaking as she approached the nursery door. She had no permission to be here. The Mafia boss had made it clear her job was cleaning, nothing more. The regular staff were chosen carefully, vetted thoroughly. She was just temporary help, someone to scrub floors and stay invisible. But none of that mattered now. She pushed the door open, and what she saw made her heart stop completely. Baby Haley lay motionless in the crib, her eyes half closed, her breathing so shallow it was almost impossible to see. Her skin burned with fever, her tiny fists opening and closing weakly, as if searching for help that would never arrive. The spoiled bottle had rolled onto the floor, its contents creating a sticky puddle on the imported carpet. Isabel rushed forward, lifting the baby into her arms with infinite gentleness. The small body was burning hot, trembling, frighteningly light, so fragile it terrified her to her core. "Oh no, oh God, no, please, not again," she whispered, her voice breaking as she cradled Haley close, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The baby's lips moved weakly, searching instinctively for something that wasn't there, some comfort that had been denied too long. In that moment, something primal awakened inside Isabel. She remembered the nights she used to feed her own daughter, the sound of soft, contented sighs, the complete trust and peace that only existed between mother and child. Her arms trembled as she realized what her body was still capable of. 8 weeks had passed since her loss, yet her body still produced milk. She had prayed desperately for it to stop, for that painful reminder to end. But now, perhaps this was why it hadn't. Tears streamed down her face as she sank into the armchair beside the window, holding Haley against her chest. "I'm so sorry, little one," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I won't lose another baby. Not tonight. Not ever." With trembling hands that moved on pure maternal instinct, she unbuttoned her simple blouse just enough to bring the dying infant close to her warmth. The baby found what she needed and latched on desperately. The room fell into profound silence. For the first time in days, Haley stopped crying. The only sounds remaining were the soft, steady rhythm of her breathing and the quiet splash of Isabel's tears falling onto the baby blanket. She held Haley tighter, rocking gently back and forth, her entire body relaxing as she felt life and strength flowing back into the tiny form. In that moment, everything else ceased to exist. The mansion, the danger, the rules, the job, none of it mattered. All that existed was a starving child and a grieving heart that had finally found a reason to keep beating. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The baby drifted into peaceful sleep, her small hand clutching the fabric of Isabel's blouse, her breathing deep and steady for the first time in days. Isabel looked down at the peaceful face, and her heart ached with a mixture of love and unbearable pain. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she whispered, gently brushing a tear from the baby's cheek. "You're safe." But then came the sound that changed everything. Footsteps in the hallway, heavy, deliberate, each step measured and controlled. The walk of a man who owned everything he surveyed and destroyed anything that threatened it. Isabel froze, her breath caught in her throat. She looked toward the door, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. The door swung open. Damon Haverford stood in the doorway, his strong jawline tight with suspicion, his eyes cold gray and calculating, taking in the scene before him. He saw his new nanny sitting in his daughter's nursery, her blouse partially undone, his baby sleeping peacefully against her chest in a way that should have been impossible. The light from the window cast long shadows across both their faces, creating a tableau that words could never adequately explain. For several long seconds, Damon didn't move. His mind, trained to assess threats and identify deception in milliseconds, couldn't process what he was seeing. The silence in the room grew heavier, more dangerous with each passing moment. Then his voice came, low and rough, carrying the weight of a man who had ordered executions for far less suspicious behavior. "What the hell are you doing?" Isabel gasped softly, instinctively pulling Haley closer as if someone might rip the child away. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Sir, please, I can explain," she stammered, tears rising instantly to her eyes. Damon stepped forward into the room, his expression unreadable, that hard mask of grief and control that had become his only face since his wife died. Part of him wanted to roar with rage, to demand answers, to remove this woman from his home immediately and permanently. But another part of him, a part he thought had died with Clara, saw something his mind refused to immediately dismiss as deception. His daughter was peaceful, genuinely peaceful. For the first time in days, Haley's face wasn't contorted in pain or hunger. The feverish red flush had faded from her cheeks. Her breathing was deep and calm. Isabel's voice shook as words tumbled out desperately. "The bottle was spoiled, sir. She was burning with fever. She was dying. I couldn't just watch her die." Damon's jaw tightened painfully. He looked from Isabel to his daughter and back again, his gray eyes searching, calculating, trying to understand. Words failed him completely. The air in the nursery grew thick with tension and unspoken emotion that neither of them knew how to navigate. For a moment, he turned away, his hands clenching into fists as he tried to control the storm building inside him. Fury, confusion, something that felt dangerously close to gratitude, all warring for dominance. Isabel sat frozen, trembling, not knowing whether the next few seconds would bring understanding or violence. Her arms held Haley protectively, terrified that letting go would mean losing another piece of her shattered heart. The antique clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, each second an eternity. Outside the window, dark clouds gathered over the estate, and a cold rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, as if the sky itself wept for the impossible situation unfolding in that room. The compound stood still, caught between judgment and mercy, between the brutal rules of the Mafia world and something far more powerful. And in that stillness, both Isabel and Damon knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next would change everything, not just for that night, but forever. The silence after Damon's question felt like a living thing, crawling across Isabel's skin and wrapping around her throat. She could see the calculation in his eyes, that cold assessment she'd witnessed from a distance during her 2 weeks in the compound. This was the man who decided fates with a single word, who built empires on fear and loyalty in equal measure. This was the widowed Mafia boss, whose grief had turned him into something harder than the steel doors that protected his home. "I asked you a question." Damon's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. His hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his side, where Isabel knew he kept a weapon. She'd seen the outline beneath his tailored jacket enough times during her careful, invisible cleaning. "She was dying," Isabel whispered, her arms tightening protectively around the sleeping baby. "The formula was spoiled. She had a fever. I couldn't." Her voice broke completely. "I couldn't watch another baby die." Something flickered across Damon's face, too quick to read. He took another step into the nursery, and Isabel instinctively pressed herself back into the armchair, her heart hammering so violently she was certain he could hear it. The moonlight streaming through the window caught the hard planes of his face, the strong jawline set in that perpetual mask of control, the grief that lived behind his eyes like a ghost he refused to acknowledge. "You couldn't watch another baby die," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words for deception. His gray eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Isabel's tears fell faster now, hot against her cheeks. "My daughter, 8 weeks ago. She was premature. I tried everything, but she..." The words dissolved into a sob she couldn't suppress. "I lost her. And when I heard your daughter crying, when I found her burning with fever and so weak, I couldn't let it happen again. I know I had no right. I know I broke every rule. But she needed help, and there was no one else." Damon stood perfectly still, processing this information with the same cold efficiency he used for everything else. His mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles, searching for the trap. In his world, nothing was ever simple. Kindness was a weapon. Vulnerability was bait. Trust was the fastest way to end up dead. He'd learned that lesson the night Clara died. She'd trusted the doctors, trusted the hospital, trusted that wealth could buy safety. But money couldn't stop complications, couldn't prevent hemorrhaging, couldn't keep his wife's heart beating when it decided to stop. And in the chaos afterward, when he'd been drowning in grief and rage, 3 of his most trusted associates had tried to stage a coup, thinking him weak and distracted. He'd dealt with them personally, permanently. Since then, paranoia had become his religion. Every smile hid a knife. Every gesture of compassion concealed an agenda. And now, this woman, this temporary cleaning girl he'd barely noticed, beyond confirming she'd passed, the basic background check was sitting in his daughter's nursery, having done something so intimate, so impossibly tender, that his mind screamed it must be some elaborate manipulation. But Haley was breathing, deeply, peacefully. For 3 days, his daughter had been fading. The doctors he'd brought in, the most expensive specialists money could summon, had run their tests and spoken in careful, clinical terms about failure to thrive, about formula intolerance, about trying different approaches. But nothing had worked. Haley had grown weaker with each passing hour, her cries becoming more desperate and then more faint, until tonight when he'd finally heard something in those cries that made his blood run cold. The sound of giving up. He'd been in the middle of negotiations that could have prevented a war between families, discussions that would determine whether dozens of his men lived or died, and all he could hear was his daughter's weakening voice through the security feed. For the first time since Clara's death, Damon Haverford had felt genuinely helpless. And now this woman had done what no amount of money or power could accomplish. She'd brought peace to his daughter's face. "Stand up," he commanded, his voice still hard. Isabel's eyes went wide with terror, but she obeyed, rising slowly from the chair while keeping Haley cradled against her chest. The baby stirred slightly, making a small, contented sound, and Damon's jaw tightened further. He crossed the distance between them in 3 measured steps, his presence overwhelming in the small space. Isabel trembled visibly, her breathing rapid and shallow, fully expecting violence. She'd heard the whispers from the other staff, the careful warnings about never crossing the boss, never questioning his decisions, never getting in his way. Damon reached out, and Isabel flinched, but his hand moved past her, reaching for his daughter. "Give her to me," he said quietly. With shaking hands, Isabel carefully transferred the sleeping infant into her father's arms. Damon held Haley with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man with his reputation, his large hands supporting her tiny body with practiced ease. He brought her close to his chest, and for a long moment, he simply looked at her face. The fever had broken. Her skin was no longer that frightening shade of red. Her breathing was steady and strong. Her small hand curled loosely around his finger, and Damon felt something crack inside his chest, some piece of the armor he'd built around his heart after Clara died. "How long have you been able to?" He couldn't finish the question, couldn't say the words out loud. "Since my daughter passed," Isabel answered softly, her voice still trembling. "My body didn't understand she was gone. The milk kept coming. I've been trying to stop it, but it wouldn't listen." Damon's eyes closed briefly. In his world, he'd seen every kind of deception, every flavor of manipulation. But this, the raw pain in her voice, the way her hands still reached unconsciously toward his daughter, even as she stood 2 feet away, this felt like truth. And truth was something he encountered so rarely in his world that he'd almost forgotten what it looked like. He should fire her immediately. Send her away with enough money to keep her quiet and enough fear to keep her distant. That was the smart move, the safe move, the move that protected him from vulnerability and kept the walls intact. But Haley made that soft, contented sound again, and Damon's resolve wavered. "The regular nanny," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "Maria. She disappeared this morning." Isabel nodded. I know. That's why I kept listening for Haley. I was worried there was no one. Maria received a threat, Damon interrupted, his voice hardening again. Against her family. Someone wanted my daughter left unattended. Someone wanted her vulnerable. His gray eyes fixed on Isabel with renewed intensity. And then, you appear. Conveniently positioned. Conveniently capable. Understanding dawned on Isabel's face, followed by fresh terror. No, sir, I swear to you, I had nothing to do with, I know. The words came out before Damon fully processed them, but as soon as he said them, he realized they were true. His instincts, honed by years of surviving in a world where mistakes meant death, were telling him something his paranoia didn't want to accept. This woman wasn't a threat. She was just broken, just grieving, just human in a way he'd forgotten people could be. You know? Isabel repeated, barely breathing. Damon looked down at his daughter again, at the peace on her face that he hadn't seen in days. If you wanted to hurt her, you had your chance. Instead, you saved her life. He paused, his jaw working as he fought against instincts that screamed danger. That doesn't mean I trust you. It means I'm not going to kill you tonight. The bluntness of his words made Isabel sway slightly, and Damon reached out to steady her with one hand, still holding Haley with the other. When did you last eat? He asked, his tone slightly less threatening. I don't remember, Isabel admitted. Sit down before you fall down. It was a command, not a suggestion. Isabel sank back into the armchair, her legs no longer capable of supporting her weight. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last hour was draining away, leaving her hollow and shaking. Damon studied her for another long moment, his mind working through possibilities and probabilities. Everything in his training, everything in his experience, told him to remove this complication from his life immediately. But Haley's steady breathing whispered a different truth. This woman had saved his daughter when he couldn't. She'd risked everything, her job, her safety, possibly her life for a child that wasn't hers. You'll stay in the compound tonight, he finally said. There's a guest room on this floor. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what happens next. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. And, Isabel, it was the first time he'd used her name. Thank you. The words came out rough and unfamiliar, like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. But they were real. Isabel looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, not quite believing what she was hearing. You're not firing me? I'm suspending judgment, Damon corrected, his expression hardening again into that unreadable mask. Don't mistake mercy for trust. I'll have security watching you. If this is some kind of game, you won't live long enough to regret it. He adjusted Haley in his arms. But if you're telling the truth, if you really did save my daughter's life tonight. He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. He walked to the door, then stopped once more. The guest room has a private bathroom. There's food in the kitchen if you can find your way. I'll have someone show you in the morning. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. Get some rest. You look like you need it. Then he was gone, carrying his daughter down the hallway, leaving Isabel alone in the nursery with her racing heart and the impossible realization that she was still alive, still safe, still here. She covered her face with her hands and wept for her lost daughter, for the baby she'd saved, for the terrifying moment when she'd thought her life was over, and for the strange, unexpected mercy she'd just received from a man who supposedly had none left to give. Outside the window, the rain continued to fall, washing the compound clean while inside, the first fragile thread of something neither of them understood, had been quietly, impossibly, woven into existence. The rain outside the Haverford compound grew heavier through the night, drops hammering against bulletproof windows like tiny fists demanding entry. Inside the war room, Damon Haverford sat surrounded by glowing monitors, his strong jawline illuminated by the cold blue light of security footage playing on repeat. His gray eyes tracked every movement on the screen the moment Isabel entered the nursery, the way she lifted Haley with such tenderness, The instant his daughter's cries finally stopped, he had watched the footage 17 times now. Each viewing brought the same conflicting storm of emotions. His daughter was alive because of what this woman did, but in his world, unexplained kindness was often the deadliest weapon. Damon pressed a button on the intercom. "Bring me everything on Isabel Rowan. Every detail of her background check. I want to know who she talked to before coming here, where she lived, who she knows. Everything." His head of security, Marcus, responded immediately through the speaker. "Already on it, boss. Should have a full report by morning." The line went dead. Damon leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The grief hidden behind his hard expression had shifted into something else. A calculating wariness that had kept him alive in a business where trust was currency more valuable than gold and far more dangerous. Upstairs in the nursery, Isabel sat in the same armchair, Haley still sleeping peacefully in her arms. She hadn't moved in hours, too afraid that putting the baby down would somehow break the fragile peace they'd found. Her body ached from holding the same position, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was the look in Damon's eyes when he caught her, that mixture of rage and confusion that promised consequences she couldn't begin to imagine. The door opened quietly. Isabel's head snapped up, her heart immediately racing. But it wasn't Damon. It was Catherine Vale. The woman moved into the room with the kind of confidence that came from years of navigating dangerous men and even more dangerous situations. Her sharp cheekbones caught the dim light, her intense demeanor barely concealed behind a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore a tailored burgundy dress that cost more than most people earned in a year, her dark hair pulled back in a style that was both severe and elegant. "So," Catherine said softly, her voice like silk wrapped around steel, "you're the one who saved little Haley." Isabel shifted slightly, protective instincts flaring. "I just did what needed to be done." Catherine's smile widened, but jealousy burned behind it like acid. She had been Damon's associate for 5 years, his confidant, the one person he trusted with his business operations. She had stood by him through his wife's death, waiting for the moment when grief would finally drive him toward her. But he remained distant, locked behind walls of ice and duty. And now this woman, this nobody with her soft brown hair and warm smile, had done something Catherine never could. She'd reached the part of Damon that still felt human. "How noble," Catherine said, moving closer. She looked down at the sleeping baby with an expression that could have been tenderness but felt more like calculation. "Though I have to wonder, what kind of woman just happens to be able to feed someone else's child? It seems almost convenient." Isabel's eyes narrowed. "I lost my daughter 8 weeks ago. There's nothing convenient about grief." "Of course not," Catherine replied smoothly. "But you have to understand how this looks. Damon has enemies everywhere. People who would do anything to get close to him, to his operations, to his daughter." She paused, letting the words hang in the air like poison. "People plant infiltrators in households all the time. It's one of the oldest tactics in our world." The accusation hit Isabel like a physical blow. "You think I'm some kind of spy?" Catherine shrugged delicately. "I think Damon needs to be careful. That's all. I'm sure your intentions are pure. But in this business, intentions don't matter. Only results. And the result is that you now have access to the one person Damon cares about more than his own life." She turned toward the door, then paused. "I'll be sure to share my concerns with him. For Haley's safety, of course." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Isabel sat in the darkness, her arms tightening around Haley. Fear coiled in her stomach like a snake. She had saved this child's life, and now she was being painted as a threat. In the world of normal people, the truth would matter. But she was beginning to understand that in Damon Haverford's world, truth was whatever the most powerful person decided it was. By morning, Marcus had delivered his report. Damon read through it methodically, his expression growing harder with each page. Isabel Rowan had no criminal record, no suspicious connections, No gaps in her employment history that couldn't be explained. She had worked as a nanny for 3 families before her daughter died. Each family gave her glowing references. She attended a small church in the city. Her bank account showed someone living paycheck to paycheck, barely surviving. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that screamed infiltrator or threat. But Catherine's words echoed in his mind during the meeting she'd requested that afternoon. They sat in his office, expensive whiskey untouched between them, as she leaned forward with concern etched into her sharp features. "I'm not saying she's definitely working for someone," Catherine said carefully. "But think about the timing, Damon. Maria disappears the same day this woman just happens to be here, and she just happens to be able to nurse Haley. It's textbook placement." Damon's jaw tightened. "Her background is clean. Backgrounds can be manufactured. You know that." Catherine's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "I'm only thinking of Haley's safety. And yours. You can't afford vulnerabilities right now. Not with the Chicago situation escalating." She was right about that, at least. The territorial dispute had turned violent 3 days ago. 2 of his men were in the hospital. The enemy family was looking for any weakness to exploit. "What would you have me do?" Damon asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Catherine met his eyes. "Let her go. Pay her well. Make sure she signs an ironclad NDA, but get her out of this house before she can do real damage." The words felt like they were being carved into his chest. Damon stood and walked to the window, looking out over the compound's grounds. In the distance, he could see Isabel walking with Haley in the garden, the baby content in her arms in a way she never was with anyone else. "She saved my daughter's life," he said quietly. "And I'm grateful for that," Catherine replied. "But gratitude can't override security. You taught me that." She was using his own words against him. Every lesson he drilled into his organization about trust and vulnerability was now being weaponized to remove the one person who'd shown his daughter genuine care. That evening, Damon summoned Isabel to his office. She entered with Haley still in her arms, the baby's tiny hand wrapped around her finger. The sight of them together sent an unexpected ache through Damon's chest, but he forced his expression to remain hard and unreadable. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Isabel sat slowly, her warm smile nowhere to be seen now. She looked at him with eyes that held both fear and something that looked like disappointment. "I need you to understand something," Damon began, his voice controlled and cold. "In my world, we can't afford to take chances, no matter how unlikely, no matter how unfair it seems. I'm not a threat to your daughter," Isabel said quietly. "Maybe not, but I can't take that risk." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "You'll be compensated generously for your service. Enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere better. But you need to leave this house tonight." The color drained from Isabel's face. "You're firing me because I saved her?" "I'm protecting her," Damon corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless even to him. "You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement. You'll never speak about this family or what happened here. In return, you'll receive $200,000. Isabel looked down at Haley, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The baby cooed softly, oblivious to the devastation unfolding around her. "She needs me. She'll adjust," Damon said, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. "Will she?" Isabel's voice broke. "Or will she stop eating again? Will you let her waste away because you're too afraid to trust anyone?" The accusation hung in the air between them. Damon wanted to shout at her, to justify his decision with talk of security and necessary precautions. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just stared at her with his grief hidden behind that hard expression while his heart screamed that he was making a terrible mistake. "Marcus will escort you out," he said finally. "You have 1 hour to pack your things." Isabel stood slowly, cradling Haley one last time. She pressed a gentle kiss to the baby's forehead, whispering something Damon couldn't hear. Then she carefully placed Haley in the bassinet beside his desk and walked toward the door without looking back. The sound of the door closing was the loneliest sound Damon had ever heard. Within 12 hours, everything fell apart. Haley refused the bottle from the new nanny Catherine had hired. She screamed through the night, her cries taking on that same weak, desperate quality they'd had before Isabel arrived. By the second day, her fever had returned. By the third day, she was limp and unresponsive. The private doctor Damon called looked grave after the examination. "Her vitals are dropping. She needs to be hospitalized immediately." The ambulance ride felt like traveling through hell. Damon sat in the back, watching paramedics work on his tiny daughter, seeing her skin grow paler, her breathing more shallow. Every beep of the monitors felt like a countdown to the moment he'd lose the last piece of his wife, the last bit of light in his dark world. At the hospital, doctors rushed Haley into intensive care. Damon stood outside the glass partition, watching them insert tubes and IVs into her fragile body, his hands pressed against the window like he could somehow reach through and pull her back from the edge. "Mr. Haverford," a doctor approached him, her expression sympathetic but clinical. "Your daughter is experiencing what we call failure to thrive. Physically, she's stable enough, but she's given up. Sometimes infants do this when they lose their primary attachment figure." "What are you saying?" Damon's voice was hollow. "I'm saying she's grieving, and until she finds something to live for again, all our medical interventions may not be enough." The words destroyed him. His daughter was dying of a broken heart, and he had caused it. Catherine appeared beside him, having followed the ambulance in her own car. "Damon, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" He turned to look at her, really look at her, and for the first time saw past the carefully constructed concern to the satisfaction lurking underneath. She had gotten what she wanted, Isabel gone, Damon dependent on her again, vulnerable and breaking. "Get out," he said quietly. Catherine blinked. "What?" "Get out of this hospital. Get out of my life." His voice was still quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. "You did this. You made me doubt the one person who actually gave a damn about my daughter. Damon, you're not thinking clearly. For the first time in weeks, I'm thinking perfectly clearly." He stepped closer to her, his gray eyes blazing with controlled fury. "You've been circling me like a vulture since Clara died, waiting for your moment. Well, you got it. Congratulations. You destroyed the only good thing in my daughter's life because you were jealous." Catherine's mask finally cracked. "She was nobody, a cleaning woman who got lucky. I've stood by you for 5 years, Damon. 5 years of loyalty, of putting your interests first." "You put your own interests first," he cut her off. "You always have. Now leave, before I have you removed." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the hospital floor. Damon watched her go, feeling nothing but contempt for himself for having listened to her in the first place. He turned back to the window where his daughter lay, surrounded by machines. The monitors showed her heart rate dropping steadily. Time was running out. Damon pulled out his phone and called Marcus. "Find Isabel Rowan. I don't care what it takes or how long it takes. Find her and bring her to me. Boss, she could be anywhere by now. Then search everywhere. Tear apart every corner of this city if you have to. She saved my daughter once, and she's the only one who can save her again." His voice cracked slightly. "Please, Marcus, find her." He hung up and pressed his forehead against the glass, watching Haley's chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. For the first time since his wife died, Damon Haverford feared Mafia boss, ruthless strategist, man who had never bent to anyone, began to pray. The conference room in the Haverford compound had witnessed countless moments of violence disguised as business negotiations. Blood had been spilled on these marble floors before, cleaned away by morning as if it never existed. The long table of polished black oak had seen men broken, deals sealed with threats, and empires carved from fear. But tonight, it would witness something entirely different. Damon Haverford stood at the head of the table, his tailored suit immaculate as always. his strong jawline set with the same hard determination that had made him one of the most feared men in the city. But his eyes, those cold gray eyes that usually calculated odds and assessed threats, held something new, something that made his capos shift uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Isabel sat beside him, not behind him where staff belonged, not in the shadows where servants waited, but directly at his right hand where only equals sat. Her light brown skin seemed to glow softly in the dim lighting, her soft brown hair falling loosely around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the severe style she'd worn as a cleaning woman. She wore a simple but elegant dress that Damon had insisted on purchasing, though she'd protested quietly that she didn't need it. Her warm smile was absent now, replaced by nervous uncertainty as she faced the assembled men who ran the Haverford operations. Catherine Vale sat across the table, her sharp cheekbones even more pronounced in the harsh lighting, her intense demeanor barely concealed behind a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had been Damon's most trusted associate once, had helped him build this empire after Clara's death, had positioned herself as indispensable. She had also been the one whispering poison in his ear about Isabel for weeks, suggesting the nanny was a plant from rival families, that her presence was dangerous. That sentiment had no place in their world. "Damon, what is this about?" Catherine's voice cut through the silence with practiced sharpness. "We have the Chicago situation to discuss. Why is the help sitting at this table?" Damon's hand moved almost imperceptibly, resting on the table between himself and Isabel. Not touching her, not yet, but close enough to be unmistakable. "Catherine, you've been with me for 3 years. You helped me survive the worst period of my life. For that, I owe you honesty." Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly, her jealousy flickering behind that forced smile. "Then, be honest. What's happening here?" "I'm making a change," Damon said quietly, his voice carrying the absolute authority that made men twice his age follow his orders without question. "Isabel Rowan saved my daughter's life when everyone else failed. When the regular nanny disappeared, paid off, or threatened, we still don't know Isabel risked everything to keep Haley alive." "She overstepped," Catherine interjected sharply. "She had no authority to—" "She had the authority of compassion," Damon cut her off, his voice dropping to that dangerous level that preceded violence. "Something I'd forgotten existed in this world." The other men at the table remained silent, watching the power struggle unfold. Marco Benedetti, Damon's oldest capo, leaned back in his chair with calculating eyes. Vincent Russo, who controlled the waterfront operations, drummed his fingers quietly on the table. These were men who understood power, who respected strength, but sentiment made them nervous. "Damon," Catherine tried again, softening her tone slightly. "I understand you're grateful. Pay her well, set her up somewhere comfortable. But bringing her into the family business is—" "I'm not bringing her into the business," Damon interrupted. "I'm bringing her into my family. There's a difference." Isabel drew in a sharp breath beside him. This wasn't what they'd discussed. He'd told her he wanted to make things right, to ensure she was protected, but this was something else entirely. Catherine's forced smile vanished completely. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Damon said, and for the first time since Clara died, the grief hidden behind his hard expression began to crack, revealing something raw and real beneath. "For months, I've ruled through fear and calculation. I've made decisions that kept us powerful, but left me empty. I watched my daughter nearly die because I was too paranoid to see the one person who actually cared." He turned to look at Isabel directly, and the room seemed to fade away. "You asked for nothing. You expected nothing. You saved Haley not because of what I could give you, but because that's who you are. You risked your life, because make no mistake, in my world, what you did could have gotten you killed to save a child who wasn't yours." Tears gathered in Isabel's eyes, her quiet strength momentarily overwhelmed by the weight of his words. Damon turned back to the table, his voice growing harder, more commanding. From this moment forward, Isabel Rowan is under Haverford protection, not as an employee, not as hired help, as family. Anyone who threatens her, disrespects her, or attempts to use her against me will answer directly to me, and you all know what that means. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Every man there understood exactly what that meant. The Haverford name meant untouchable. It meant that harming Isabel would be the same as attacking Damon himself, a death sentence. Marco Benedetti spoke for the first time, his gravelly voice thoughtful. "Boss, I understand loyalty. I respect it. But bringing an outsider this close, it's a vulnerability. Our enemies will see it as weakness." "Let them," Damon said flatly. "Let them think sentiment has made me weak. Let them underestimate what I'm willing to do to protect what matters. They'll learn the difference between weakness and having something worth fighting for." Catherine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane, Damon. You're risking everything we've built for." "For what, Catherine?" Damon's voice turned to ice. "Say it." Catherine's mouth opened and closed, her face flushing with barely controlled rage. "For someone who's been here less than 2 months. Someone who knows nothing about our world, who could be compromised, who showed more courage in one night than most of us show in a lifetime," Damon finished. He stood slowly, his broad shoulders blocking out the light behind him, making him seem even more imposing. "I want to be clear about something else. The information you've been feeding me about Isabel, the suggestions that she was a plant, that she had ulterior motives, I've had that investigated thoroughly." Catherine's face went carefully blank, but Isabel saw the flash of fear in her eyes. "Every claim you made was false," Damon continued, his voice deadly quiet. "Isabel Rowan is exactly who she appears to be. A woman who lost her own child and couldn't stand to watch another one die. That's all. No hidden agenda. No rival family connections. Nothing but grief and compassion." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "What I can't quite figure out, Catherine, is why you worked so hard to poison me against her. Was it about protecting the business? Or was it about protecting your position?" Catherine's forced smile returned, though it looked more like a grimace now. "I was protecting you, Damon. That's all I've ever done." "No," Damon said softly. "You were protecting your access to me. There's a difference." The silence that followed was profound. Marco and Vincent exchanged glances, recalculating loyalties and power dynamics in real time. They'd survived in this world by knowing when to fight and when to adapt. This was clearly a time to adapt. Vincent spoke up, his voice careful but respectful. "Boss, if she's family, she's family. We protect our own. That's the code." Marco nodded slowly. "The Benedetti family stands with Haverford. Always has. If you say she's under protection, then she's under protection." Damon's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his expression remained hard. "Catherine, I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I think it's time we restructured your role in the organization. You'll maintain your territories and your percentages, but you'll no longer have direct access to family decisions." Catherine's face went white with fury, but she was smart enough to know when she'd lost. She grabbed her bag from the table, her movements sharp with barely controlled rage. "You'll regret this, Damon. Sentiment has no place in our world. It only gets people killed." "Maybe," Damon said quietly. "But I'd rather die protecting something real than live protecting nothing but power." Catherine left without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors as she disappeared into the night. When the door closed behind her, the remaining men at the table visibly relaxed. Marco even allowed himself a small smile. "Well, boss, that was interesting. Your daughter, she's doing well?" For the first time all evening, Damon's hard expression softened completely. "She's perfect, healthy, happy, eating well, all because of Isabel." "Then you made the right choice," Marco said simply. "Family first. That's always been the rule." The meeting concluded quickly after that, with the capos filing out one by one, each nodding respectfully to Isabel as they passed. When the room finally emptied, leaving only Damon and Isabel in the dim lighting, The weight of what had just happened settled over them both. Isabel turned to him, her warm smile finally returning, though tears still glistened in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that. I never asked for." "I know," Damon interrupted gently. "That's exactly why I did it. You asked for nothing. You gave everything. In my world, that kind of selflessness is so rare, it's almost mythical." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hand in his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "Isabel, I spent months hiding behind grief and paranoia. I confused ruthlessness with strength, isolation with protection. You showed me what real courage looks like. You showed me that kindness isn't weakness, it's the strongest thing in the world. I was just doing what felt right," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's who you are, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure the world never punishes you for it." Upstairs in the nursery, baby Haley slept peacefully in her crib, her tiny hand clutching the soft blanket that Isabel had tucked around her earlier. The security monitors showed her chest rising and falling steadily, her face peaceful and content. For the first time since Clara's death, the mansion felt like a home instead of a fortress. Damon led Isabel to the window overlooking the compound's private garden. Rain had cleared, leaving the night air fresh and clean. Stars were visible through gaps in the clouds, their light soft and distant. "I can't promise you a normal life," Damon said quietly, still holding her hand. "My world is dangerous. There will always be threats, always be people trying to use anyone I care about against me." "I know," Isabel said. "I've seen enough to understand, but I can promise you this," he continued, turning to face her fully. "You and Haley will never face danger alone. The full weight of everything I've built, all the power I've accumulated, all the loyalty I've earned, it all stands between you and harm. Always." Isabel looked up at him, seeing past the strong jawline and the hard expression to the grieving father underneath, the man who'd learned to trust again despite everything. "That's not what I need from you, Damon." "Then what do you need?" "I need to know that this," she gestured between them, "is real. Not gratitude, not obligation, not protection purchased with power, just real." Damon pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to gently cup her face. "It's real," he whispered. "More real than anything I've felt since Clara died. You didn't just save my daughter's life, Isabel. You saved mine too." When he kissed her, it was gentle and careful, as if he was afraid she might disappear like smoke if he held too tight. Isabel's arms came up around his neck, and for a moment, all the pain and loss and fear that had haunted them both seemed to fade into something softer, something that felt like hope. Upstairs, Haley stirred in her sleep and smiled, as if she knew that the broken pieces of her family were finally beginning to heal. The compound that had been built on fear and violence had found something new growing in its heart, something that no amount of power or money could buy, but that could only be given freely from one wounded soul to another. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the Haverford estate, it would shine on a new kind of empire, one built not just on strength, but on love, not just on fear, but on trust, not just on power, but on the courage to be vulnerable with the one person who'd proven worthy of that gift. The grief, hidden behind Damon's hard expression, had finally found its opposite 20. Not happiness exactly, but something better. Purpose, connection, a reason to believe that tomorrow might be worth protecting after all. Before we close this chapter, if this story moved you even a little, please subscribe, tap like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Your support helps these kindness stories reach more people, and I'm always grateful to have you as part of the Kindness Matters Stories family.